What DNA uncovered about Princess Diana's family lineage stunned historians, and even the scientist who made the discovery couldn't believe it himself. In 2013, Dr. Jim Wilson of the University of Edinburgh conducted routine genetic testing on 2 of Diana's maternal relatives. What came back from the lab left him speechless. He repeated the test. Same result. He repeated it a 3rd time. Identical. What he saw before him had never appeared in any European lineage, not once in a database of more than 65,000 people worldwide. It pointed to a woman systematically erased from the Spencer family records more than 200 years ago. A woman whose letters went unanswered and whose name was replaced with a deliberate lie. A lie so carefully maintained that even Diana's closest living relatives didn't know the truth existed. Here's what the DNA found. Who did it lead to? And why did the Spencer family spend 2 centuries ensuring that no one would ever discover it? The discovery of DNA. The samples arrived in Edinburgh in 2 small vials of saliva. They came from 2 women who were direct descendants of Princess Diana's mother, both 3rd cousins of Diana's mother, Frances Shand Kidd. They weren't random volunteers. They were chosen specifically because they shared something extraordinary. An unbroken mother-daughter connection stretching back more than 200 years. Dr. Wilson and his team, working alongside the genetic ancestry company Britain's DNA, focused on a specific type of genetic material, mitochondrial DNA. Here's the key. Unlike ordinary DNA, which is rearranged each time 2 parents conceive a child, mitochondrial DNA is passed down intact from mother to daughter, generation after generation, like a sealed letter that no one can open or alter along the way. Your great-great-grandmother could have carried a specific marker 1,000 years ago, and you would carry the exact same one today. No man entering the family line could touch it. No marriage, no adoption, no scandal could alter it. The team scanned hundreds of markers across the mitochondrial genome. Routine test. Another aristocratic line confirmed. Except it wasn't. When the results came in, Dr. Wilson saw a marker he'd spent his entire career associating with a single region of the planet. He stared at the screen, incredulous. He repeated the analysis, and repeated it again. The result didn't change. The samples belonged to haplogroup R30b. Now pay close attention to what that means. Of more than 65,000 people in their worldwide genetic database, only 14 carried this exact marker. 13 lived in India, 1 lived in Nepal. No one in Europe had it, no one in Africa, no one in the Americas, and it had just turned up in Princess Diana's direct maternal line. Here's the astonishing part. Haplogroup R30b, along with its closely related branches R30 and R30a, is entirely of South Asian origin. No ambiguity, no alternative explanation. Dr. Wilson later told the press that the evidence was irrefutable, independently confirmed by DNA, matching from 2 living relatives who didn't even know each other. It wasn't contamination, not a statistical fluke. It was a clear and undeniable scientific trace. The presence of R30b meant only one thing. At some point, about 7 generations before Princess Diana, a woman of South Asian descent had entered her direct maternal line. Not a distant cousin, not a junior branch, the direct line. Mother to daughter to daughter to daughter, all the way back to Diana herself. Which meant that the official Spencer family history, printed in every genealogy book, every royal biography, every wedding program, was missing someone. Someone real. Someone who had been deliberately erased. Official histories are constructed by people who have something to protect. This channel exists to find those who were left out. If that's the kind of story you came looking for, subscribe now, because what follows is exactly that. And here's the thing. Whoever erased her did such a thorough job that it took 200 years and a breakthrough in genetic science to find her again. The question became, who was she, and why had every trace of her existence been destroyed? Eliza Kewark, the woman they erased, Her name was Eliza Kewark, and for more than 2 centuries she didn't exist. Not in the Spencer genealogies, not in any royal biography, not in a single public family record before 2013. She had been erased so effectively that even people who carried her DNA didn't know she was part of their history. She was born around 1790 in Surat, a bustling port city on the west coast. Surat, in what is now the state of Gujarat, was one of India's great trading hubs. Merchant ships from a dozen nations crowding the harbor, traders shouting in a jumble of languages, goods, people, and cultures colliding in the narrow alleyways every day. It was the kind of place where a woman of mixed heritage could exist without attracting too much attention. Elisa's father bore the Armenian surname Kewark. She signed her own letters in Armenian script. That detail would later become the family's most useful lie. But her mother's line, the one that carried the rare mitochondrial marker R30b, was South Asian. In colonial India, mixed heritage was common in port cities like Surat. Armenian traders had lived there for generations, intermarrying with local families. But in the rigid social hierarchy of the British Empire, such an ancestry carried serious consequences. And this is where the story takes a turn. As a young woman, Eliza became the companion of Theodore Forbes, a Scottish merchant who arrived in Surat around 1809 to work for the East India Company. Forbes was the youngest son of a landowning family from Brooks, near Aberdeen. Ambitious, calculating, and determined to forge a career in the most lucrative colonial post in the empire, he employed Eliza as his housekeeper. But the reality of their relationship went far beyond any job title. Together, they had 2 children, a daughter named Catherine, born in 1812, and a son named Alexander, born 2 years later. For a time, the family lived together first in Surat, then in Mocha, Yemen, where Theodore was appointed British political resident. His official duties included buying coffee for the East India Company and monitoring shipping lanes in the Red Sea. But letters from this period reveal that Eliza was much more than a domestic servant. Theodore relied on her multilingual skills. She translated for him, facilitated diplomatic contacts with merchants and local authorities. In every private matter, they were like family. But here's what no one expected. As Theodore's reputation grew and his ambitions drew him into the upper echelons of colonial society as his career progressed and he accepted a prestigious society back in Bombay, the social realities of British India closed in on them like a trap. In the salons and gentlemen's clubs of colonial Bombay, a companion with Indian blood wasn't simply frowned upon. It was a liability, capable of ruining a career. The era of racial tolerance in British India was rapidly ending. A new order of rigid segregation was taking hold, and Theodore was choosing his career. He left Eliza and the children behind in Surat, moved to Bombay alone, stayed with friends, attended society dinners, accepted invitations to the homes of other men in the company and their European wives, and built a new life without them. Meanwhile, Eliza and her children lived apart, disconnected, abandoned in the city where they had once been a family. He didn't even write to her directly. When decisions had to be made about the children's future, their education, their passage to Europe, their very fate, Theodore had intermediaries handle the correspondence. The woman who had given him children, who translated for him, who helped run his household in 2 countries, was reduced to a logistical problem, a loose end to be managed remotely. And then something happened that still haunts this story 2 centuries later. 218 AD. After Theodore's death, a packet of letters written in a non-European script was discovered at the Forbes family estate in Brooks, Scotland. They had lain in a drawer for decades, untouched, unread, gathering dust. When scholars finally examined them, they realized what they held. The letters were from Eliza, written in rudimentary English, dictated to a Parsi scribe because her written English wasn't good enough, and signed in her own hand in Armenian script, letter after letter after letter, spanning years, all with the same desperate plea to be allowed to see her daughter one last time before Catherine was sent away to Europe forever. In one letter she wrote, "My good Lord, I beg you to let me know. With your permission, I will bring my daughter to deliver her into your hands myself." Think about that for a second. A mother asking for permission. Permission to give up her own child. Knowing that once he did it, he would never see that girl again. knowing that an ocean and an empire would stand between them. And yet, he offered to do it. She made the journey herself just to hug Catherine one last time. The girl, sent halfway around the world when Theodore died at sea in 1820, everything fell apart. His will described Eliza only as his housekeeper. He called Catherine his supposed illegitimate daughter. Every word surgical, every word chosen to sever any legal or social connection between Eliza and the family she had helped to build. Catherine, barely 8 years old, was put on a ship bound for Scotland, accompanied only by a servant named Fasagul, an 8-year-old girl who had never seen snow, never felt a Scottish winter, never heard English as her first language. Put on a ship and sent halfway around the world to live with relatives she had never met in a country she couldn't even imagine. She never saw her mother again. Young Alexander, her brother, also made it to Scotland, but he was so homesick, so desperately miserable, that he was eventually sent back to Surat to be with Eliza. The Forbes family let the boy go. They kept the baby girl. Catherine stayed. She grew up among them. She adapted. She learned to speak, dress, and behave as if India had never existed. Eventually, she married well. But here's what matters most. Through Catherine, this hidden bloodline didn't just survive. It flourished. Catherine had a daughter. That daughter had a daughter. And so it went generation after generation until the line produced Ruth, then Frances, and then a baby girl born on July 1st, 1961, at Park House on the Sandringham estate. Her name was Diana Frances Spencer. 7 generations, from a port city in India to the most famous wedding in television history. And no one in the family ever told the truth about where that bloodline really began. Because the silence wasn't accidental. It was designed. A 2-century-long cover-up. Sometime in the 19th century, someone sat down with the Spencer family genealogy and made a decision. Where should Eliza Kewark's name have appeared? Where her heritage, her origins, her connection to India should have been recorded. They wrote a single word instead. Armenia. It could have been a scribe. It could have been a family member. It could have been a lawyer hired precisely for that purpose. But whoever held the pen knew exactly what they were doing. They weren't correcting a mistake. They were constructing a lie that would stand for 200 years. That's all it took. One word and the erasure was complete. Eliza's surname Kewark was similar enough to the Armenian name Kewark. She signed letters in Armenian script. Her father genuinely could have had Armenian roots. And that single thread became the entire official story. Armenia meant Christian. Armenia meant respectable. Armenia meant acceptable European. A harmless eccentricity of the empire, nothing more. The Indian heritage, on the other hand, would have been treated as a permanent stain. A contamination that no amount of wealth, no advantageous marriage, no title could ever wash away. The cover-up didn't just last a generation, it lasted over 200 years. Family trees, marriage records, church archives, private correspondence, all carefully erased. By the 20th century, the lie was so deeply entrenched that no one alive even questioned it. When Diana married Prince Charles at St. Paul's Cathedral in 1981, in front of 750 million television viewers, official biographies still described Eliza Kewark as Armenian. No one in the Spencer family questioned it. No one in the royal household questioned it. The secret survived 2 world wars. It survived the collapse of the British Empire. It survived the most watched wedding in human history, until 2013, when 2 vials of saliva blew it to bits. Now this is where things get personal. After the DNA results were released, reporters tracked down Diana's maternal aunt, a woman named Mary Roach, one of the few people still alive who had grown up hearing the old family stories. When they told her what the DNA had revealed, she paused, then said something that encapsulates 2 centuries of deception in a single sentence. I always assumed I was part Armenian, so I'm delighted to have Indian roots as well. A woman within Princess Diana's own family had lived her entire life believing a story that was genetically false. She didn't know it, her mother didn't know it, her grandmother didn't know it. Generation after generation, women in this family passed on Elisa's mitochondrial DNA in their cells, while passing down the fictitious Armenian story at their family tables. Biological truth and family mythology. They had traveled side by side for 200 years. And no one noticed that they were telling completely different stories. The true story had been written in their cells all along. It just took science finally reading it. More real than the royals. But here's where this story takes a turn no one saw coming. When Diana's engagement to Prince Charles was announced in 1981, the editors of Burke Spirit, the definitive register of the British aristocracy, issued a public statement that stunned even the royal household. They declared that Lady Diana Spencer had more English royal blood running through her veins than her future husband. The Spencers, they said, were brimming with royal connections. Think about it for a moment. The woman whose family had spent 2 centuries hiding her Indian ancestry turned out to be more royal than the prince she was marrying. Now comes the part that almost no one hears because it doesn't fit the sanitized version of the fairy tale. The royal blood in Diana's family didn't flow through official marriages or grand alliances negotiated between kingdoms. It came through mistresses. Barbara Villiers Louis de Kerouac and Nell Gwyn had all captivated King Charles II, a monarch famous for fathering more than 12 children with women who would never become queens. The Spencer family traces its lineage through not 1 or 2, but 3 of these royal mistresses. Their children were born outside the rules of succession, but their lineage quietly wove itself into the English aristocracy over the centuries. Diana was descended from Henry Fitzroy, Duke of Grafton, and Charles Lennox, Duke of Richmond, both illegitimate sons of Charles II. 11 generations back, she was also a direct descendant of Mary, Queen of Scots, executed in 1587 by her cousin Elizabeth I. Meanwhile, the Spencer estate at Althorpe had stood since 1508, surviving wars, dynasties, and the rise and fall of monarchs. The royal family's own surname, however, was Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, entirely German, until King George V quietly renamed them Windsor during the First World War to avoid anti-German backlash. And that's the lethal irony. By the oldest reckoning, Diana didn't marry upwards. Charles did. The family that had erased a woman from India to protect its position had produced the most consequential bride in modern royal history. The Spencers had guarded their secrets so fiercely for so long that by the time Diana walked down Po 7600, the aisle of St. Paul's Cathedral, the irony was invisible to everyone in the building. And yet, no one spoke the truth. Not until the DNA spoke for itself. The line ends. This is where the story closes, and closes with a bang. Prince William carries the same rare mitochondrial marker R30B that originated in Gujarat more than 200 years ago. It passed through Eliza Kewark, crossed oceans, survived colonial prejudice, survived 2 centuries of deliberate erasure, and landed in the DNA of the man who will one day sit on the British throne. Autosomal markers across the genomes of Diana's 2 maternal cousins confirmed that they carried between 0.3 and 0.8% South Asian ancestry, meaning that William himself almost certainly carries a small but real portion of Indian DNA inherited directly from Eliza. He will be the first British monarch with proven Indian ancestry. The Commonwealth, home to more than 1 billion people of South Asian descent, will one day be led by a king who carries a direct genetic link to his region in his very cells. That's not symbolism, not a diplomatic gesture, not a sentimental headline. It's biology, written in the DNA of a man who will wear the crown. But here's the final twist, and this one doesn't have a happy ending. Mitochondrial DNA flows only from mother to son. Men carry it, but they can't pass it on. William inherited the R30B marker from Diana, but won't his children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, inherit it from him? They'll inherit their mitochondrial DNA from their mother, Catherine. Not from William, not from Diana, not from Eliza. The marker dies with William and his brother Harry. 2 men, that's all, the last carriers of this line. Now pay attention to what that means. The ancient genetic thread that traveled from a port city on the west coast of India through 7 generations of English women across continents, through centuries of enforced silence, to the steps of Buckingham Palace. That thread ends here, not with a catastrophe, not with a scandal, not with some dramatic revelation. Simply, quietly, biologically, irreversibly. Eliza Kewark was erased from the family records. Her letters gathered dust in a Scottish drawer for almost 200 years. Her name was replaced with a convenient lie. Her heritage was erased from every document the family could find. She fought to see her daughter one last time, but they wouldn't let her. They buried her name. They rewrote her history. They turned her. They fashioned her into someone she wasn't. And now, 200 years later, even her DNA, the one thing they couldn't rewrite, the last whisper of proof that she ever existed in this lineage, will disappear. The Spencers spent 200 years hiding this woman. They controlled what was written, what was recorded, and what future generations would be allowed to believe. If they buried this, if they could erase an entire human being from the ancestry of the most photographed woman in history, what do you think the world's most powerful families are still hiding? Subscribe now, because the stories they don't want you to hear are always the ones most worth telling. Most worth telling.